So what do you do with a running YouTube channel?
I'm gonna post.
You like run with your phone?
Get that in front of your face real quick. Let's get everything going.
You run with your phone?
So what I've done so far, I started
You
last
have a GoPro?
Started last week.
You put it on your head?
No frills. My phone's with me because I listen to podcasts anyway.
Yeah.
So I'll pull it out and just do like a 2-3 minute clip.
On my head.
2-3 minute clip talking about whatever it is I'm doing that day.
What are you talking about?
Like
what are you doing?
Nothing.
Besides
like,
running. You're like, hey.
We're running. Trail run day. Here's what we're doing. Also training for the BFC. I mean, it's BS stuff.
Do you have like
whatever is on the top of my mind?
Do you have a GoPro stick that you run with?
No, I got nothing.
Or like one of those sticks and you got your phone and you're running and you got the thing in front of you?
I don't have time to do another channel.
And then
so it's literally, I think I'll talk about my shoes or speed work day or whatever it is that the goal is. It may run its course, but I don't know.
See, I love that. I need more bandwidth in my life. I need hot takes. That's what I need. I need the platform and the freedom to do hot takes.
Well, here's the thing. This requires zero additional bandwidth because I'm already running. You're already running, spending hours a week out there.
Right.
Pull out the phone if you got something to say, and you'll figure out if you have something to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We're just getting our faces in front of the microphone and here we go.
Yeah.
And that's the premise of this channel.
And how many subscribers do you have to your running? 3? Who are they? You,
me, my
Progress
buddy Brian,
and Perfection,
and probably my mom.
the Excel channel too.
Oh, I have been commenting from my other two channels.
Yeah, no, I've noticed that. Yeah, I've noticed that. Trying to generate this, trying to generate some action there.
Get something going.
So your mom and your buddy?
Yeah, mom. It's classic, man.
Did your mom comment on your YouTube channel?
No. See, it started like a year ago.
Yeah.
I did Barkley Fall Classic urban training. I did like 6 videos a year and a half ago. And then it's been sitting there. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. Here goes nothing.
I'll have to find you on the...
I'll send it to you.
All right. Well, thanks for the information.
Indeed, sir.
Always a pleasure.
Page 39. Is that where that comes
39.
from?
Yep. Top of 39. Thanks for the information.
You want me to go? You want to read?
Please feel free.
All right.
Please feel free.
That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. And before we read Fred's story, this seems to be, I agree with what they're getting at here. This seems to be true of alcoholics. And they even say potential alcoholics.
Right.
Like once we get to that point, self-knowledge doesn't seem to work. It didn't work for me.
Right.
Like I remember, I think I've talked about it before, having a conversation with one of my best buddies before, like when I knew I had an issue, but before I was ready to get sober. And he was all about willpower. Like if you have an issue, just stop.
Just stop.
And for whatever reason, that seems to be one of the criteria for potential and real alcoholics. Like it just doesn't work.
How often do you see people come to your group with that idea?
I think all of us carry that at the beginning to some degree or another. Like it's very rare that I see somebody come in that hasn't already tried or is not actively trying to moderate or to just do better or do it on their own terms. Yeah, it gets to a point where you amass a certain amount of willingness to ask for help. And when I end up seeing people, and probably you too, when they're actually, okay, I got to do something different. Maybe I'll let somebody into the fold.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know that I've ever met somebody who hasn't had some level of that.
Sure.
Some of us go a lot further with it than others.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's rare you meet somebody that possesses the humility right off the bat to just do away with their own willpower, their own ego, and allow the Lord to do the work. Typically, there's some stubbornness that gets mixed into the equation that more times than not prevents people from at least grasping sober-mindedness. It may not end up in a relapse, but to achieve that sort of sober-mindedness, I think there's got to be the surrender of will that this book will continue to parse out for us through the steps.
Well, it may be in the 12 and 12, that old adage of pain being the touchstone of all spiritual growth, like pretty true, especially in the beginning.
Yep.
Takes a certain amount of that for us to get to that. Okay, let's do something different.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we got another story here that the chapter kind of closes out with about old Fred. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from drinking, he was an alcoholic, he told himself. He came to the hospital to rest his nerves. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he'd acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back, nevertheless.
Before we dive into Fred's take here, I think it's kind of remarkable that, like, it took him going to the hospital to begin the process of admittance that there might be a problem.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I don't know. I mean, in my experience, not my personal experience, but just with other people too, like, that's years in the making to wind up quick in that sort of jittery state that they're talking about, sort of the delirium tremens, where you're, virtually, that's not an overnight thing. So, like, there were years of hoodwinking and convincing himself that everything was fine prior to him ending up in the hospital, which I guess I'm bringing up because it's like the perfect proof of that sort of self-will. Like, nothing's wrong here. I've totally got this under control until I don't. Yeah. Like, it's like catastrophic, man. And I guess, like, on a certain level, that's all of our experiences. But I find that just remarkable.
Oh yeah. And I think about how lucky I was. I basically ran out of money and was, just a wuss at the time and was afraid of experiencing pain. I got so lucky at that moment in time as a young person to reach out and be willing enough for just long enough to get wrapped into treatment and get the help I needed.
Yeah.
Like, it's usually this, I feel like this is the more common slow burn, downward descent, the downward spiral that are years in the making of just continually getting worse.
Well, especially, I think, I don't know, maybe not, but like, I think with alcohol in particular,
Yeah.
it is sort of the slow drip
Yep.
as opposed to sort of the cataclysmic, slap in the face when it comes to like a hard substance like crack or coke or heroin or something like that.
Yeah.
It's typically just kind of like wham in your face.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. Like maybe there's something to the social acceptability or the cohort you run in that allows this sort of pervasive spirit of normalcy to just, yes, cut death by 1,000 cuts, ends up taking place before suddenly you wind up in the hospital. Curious about this too. Why do you think stories resonate so much with addicts and alcoholics?
Well, that's a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I'm kind of in some online marketing circles online the last year or so, and storytelling is like everybody's like, oh, you gotta tell better stories. That's what attracts, people. People want to hear stories. And there's something to that. I think we're hardwired as humans to both pass down our ancestry and our storylines, and be receptive to that, because we can, like when I hear somebody's story, I can identify. I'm looking for places of it that I can identify with, and it makes me feel connected to you when you say some piece of your story that's like, oh, that's a parallel to mine. And so we latch onto that as addicts and alcoholics more so because we have such a tumultuous, traumatic past that I used to think was unique to me. And part of my recovery has been the opening of my eyes for years now. But in the beginning, the initial opening of my eyes that I'm not really that unique. I really am not. And in fact, there's been scores of other people in far worse situations, but we do have this commonality. And so I latch on to the pieces of their own unique stories that are all that are all similar in these regards. And it goes back to relationship, what we always talk about: relationship, fellowship, community, the things that solidify our sobriety that seems so slippery in the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're like hardwired to be receptive to like narrative and to story, and I think like particular types of stories. It's like the universal story that exists in the word, is basically the story of all of us. And when we tap into those themes of like fall, wandering, redemption, or like it's the story of the tyrant and leaving slavery into the chaos and then being led by the pillar into the promised land. That's basically every story that we read in this book. Yeah. And that's basically every story of every addict an alcoholic who's in recovery, was understanding that I'm under the rule of this tyrant. And suddenly I'm breaking free from that slavery. But I found myself in this chaotic wilderness roaming around. And then suddenly you orient yourself to, the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire that eventually leads you into that place. And so I think you're right. Like there is this sort of almost, I don't know it's like in our genes, that these stories resonate with us.
Absolutely.
It's kind of neat.
All right, onward to Fred.
All right, tell us about Fred.
Where are we? We heard no more of Fred for a while.
We read that.
Let him tell you.
Let him tell you
about
about
it. There we go.
Let Fred tell you about it.
All right, sorry.
Go ahead, Fred.
Let him tell you about it.
Do you want to do a voice for Fred?
I was much. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that.
Probably
Would
not.
you like to do a voice for Fred?
I was much impressed with the fellows. No, go ahead.
I was much impressed with what you fellas said about alcoholism, and frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I'd learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I'd been unusually successful in licking my I'd been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about it. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering.
Dude, that's insane.
Yeah. Like that.
Like, well, I mean, it's quick, but then it's like that's a bender, bro.
Yeah.
Like for
he
several
did it right,
days.
several days. Yeah.
Like I'm just gonna be like blackout inebriated for several days.
Ghosted the wife.
Like
took the taxi somewhere.
Hard.
Yeah.
Like he went hard.
Yeah, he went at it.
He went
Fred
hard.
doesn't mess around.
Fred is just goes hard, bro. Like a couple of cocktails.
If he's going to do it, he's going to do it correctly.
Then I'm going to go and have a couple of highballs, and that'll be fine. And I'm going to wake up in the morning and have a couple more highballs, and that'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be like, F the wife, bro.
It'll be fine.
I'm going to meet this cabbie and just kill it. Like, that's pretty insane.
Insane is the right word. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. So presumably in the hospital, he's like, what the crap?
Yeah.
Not only had I been off guard, I'd made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I'd commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they professed that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They'd said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen, and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I'd never been able to understand people who said a problem had been hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentally, such as I, had an alcoholic mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlawed the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I'd been only a nominal churchman, their propositions were not intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. I'm going to finish it up here. It's
Yeah.
a long read, but let's get to the end first.
Yeah.
Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I've since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and, I hope, more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems.
Okay, wait a minute. So, like, that's insane. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer?
Yeah, what's the rest of the ringer look like?
Like, good Lord, this dude went hard in the paint, like we just said.
Yeah.
You know? So, like, it gives you a perspective on, like, just how bad the conditions were that these dudes were dealing with.
They were really bad. I think more often they were really bad. I know they were then. We see a lot, I do at least, just from the area that we currently live in, a lot of higher bottom
That's right.
Drunks that get, thankfully, get there before the bottom really falls out.
Mm-hmm.
But stuff like this is a very, forgive the pun, sobering reminder that it can get freaking bad.
Yeah.
Like, that was the same train we were on.
Mm-hmm.
And we got off. I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Like, you can get off. You don't have to take the elevator all the way down.
Right. Right.
But it does. It gets, the ringer gets bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty amazing. All right. Finish it out there.
Yeah. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose story I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless apart from divine help. There's a lot of encouraging doctor talk in this book. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I'd been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have a profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there's virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power.
I mean, lots of absolutes.
Yeah.
The spiritual principles would solve all my problems. 100% hopeless. Must come from a higher power. And these dudes know what they're talking about. It's not like they weren't experiencing it. And I think that's part of the narratives that they're giving to us is like, no, we've been in the trenches and we've seen it in the most hopeless situations. This thing come to fruition, and this program work for people. But it's I keep coming back to it's highlighted in the book. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink.
Yeah.
This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. That idea of like made no fight whatever, it just resonates with me because like I think we've alluded to this prior and we'll continue to allude to it, but like we've got to be prepared on a daily basis to fight so that these types of like, I don't know, I'd call it a sneak attack, but you know what I'm saying? Like these types of vulnerabilities don't show up. We're always in the posture of fighting, but I think what that requires is an understanding that also we're always capable of being very dangerous. That's why we always have to be fighting. And when we think that we've got it licked or like, I'm not dangerous anymore, I'm not, I'm totally fine to, go to the bar and drink water. It's going to be, whatever. I think that's the kind of situation where suddenly your guard is down. And if you're not fighting, like, that's what happens.
You become susceptible to this scenario
Mm-hmm.
much more so than normal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think it's appropriate to just highlight in AA, there's some basics of AA, like the 1 day at a time thing.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? That's catchy. People say that all the time. Well, there's some basic stuff that we suggest people do from the very beginning
Mm-hmm.
every day, like
Right.
not Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like every freaking day.
And what are they? What are some things that you help people with?
And I'll give a handful, non-exhaustive.
Mm-hmm.
Hitting your knees in the morning and praying.
Mm-hmm.
Even, and we'll talk about this, the next chapter is we agnostics, even if you don't believe in God.
Right.
But going through the motions, praying, God, keep me sober today.
Right.
Will you please keep me sober? Going through that motion. At night, thanking him. God, thank you for keeping me sober today.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I don't
posture
believe
of
in God.
humility.
It's that
and
posture.
then a response of gratitude.
Yeah, big time. So there's prayer, some sort of recovery literature, like consuming some sort of recovery literature. For me, I mean, you see my couch over there is strewn. I've got Bibles and books, but feeding yourself.
Does
with
the Bible
something.
count as recovery literature?
I would say
For you?
For me, it does, but it's not going to be enough in the beginning because, I mean, we got cameras running today. If the video works out, this is my big book that I've had for what, 21, 22 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of know this inside out. And so I don't sit here and read the big book every day anymore. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But so I supplement it with other things. In the beginning, this needs to be, or the 24-hour day book or the
Right.
daily reflections, some very specific, and whatever program you're in related to that program, I think is very important
Mm-hmm.
to start saturating in that, as well as in your faith, if you're coming back to a faith or you're involved with a faith walk. So that's a long second thing there. Just start saturating with recovery stuff.
Yeah.
Talking to somebody else in recovery, getting a sponsor and talking to him or her,
Mm-hmm.
going to a meeting and being around other people,
Right.
keeping a gratitude list.
Mm-hmm.
There's just all these little things. And what I usually do for people is I start suggesting with kind of those as a bare minimum. And then I get into more granular stuff as habits become formed.
Right.
But it is so critical
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't get caught off guard in a moment where we're not protected.
Right.
Because all we are when we get sober, I was naked and confused.
That's right.
And just like an emotional thread
Right.
waiting for something to happen.
Right. Yeah. Like I'll describe like the difference for a lot of people I help, the difference between like abstinence and sober-mindedness. And it reminds me a lot of what you're saying. Like in early sobriety, I'm abstinent, but I'm not yet sober-minded.
Yeah.
And you apply, just like we'll read, you begin to apply these principles on a daily basis. It's like putting on the armor. Suddenly you become more sober-minded.
Mm.
And it's no longer a list of tasks that you're trying to complete. These are just daily habits that you engage in because like you're sober-minded now. So yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think like also to your point, I agree. Like, I mean, I love God's word. In early recovery, I don't know that God's word, it's kind of dangerous to say, but I don't know that it is enough to keep you reminded of why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like if I'm in early recovery and I commit, like I'm going to read the Bible in a year, that's going to be awesome. But suddenly you're going to be sitting in like Numbers, and there's going to be no context in Numbers that's going to remind you why you're doing what you're doing that day. Yeah. And that's where I think recovery literature, whether it's the big book, whether it's the 12 by 12, whether it's a 24-hour a day, whether it's the devotional book that you're working on, I think where that comes in handy because it serves to remind you why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yep. You know, so like, yeah, I agree with you. Like I try to touch God's word. I try to touch recovery literature. I'm in communication all day with people. So like, that's good.
Check.
Yeah. But like the prayer piece is just crucial in the morning time and in the evening time. But then I think the other thing, at least for me, is just sort of a commitment to like the whole body idea of recovery, which I think also like it's the body mind connection. So I think it does pertain to sober mindedness, but sort of engaging in exercise, for me is a big part of like my daily armor that I'm trying to put on, that keeps me in that posture of fighting.
Big time.
And not to say like everybody's got to go and run all the time, but something that keeps you engaged in sort of that.
It's a big help.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start running?
Oh, the day I quit smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Was the same exact, this is hilarious. It's the same exact day I stopped running. Or I started running.
Yeah.
It was at the corner, there was a park at the corner of Old Canton and Lakeside, Lake something?
Lakeland.
Yeah, Lakeland, right there at the corner.
Yeah.
And there was this park and it was a mile-long loop.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, I can't smoke cigarettes and run. So like I'm going to start running to stop smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And so I went out there and ran like maybe a quarter of a mile and like was like bent over and was just like couldn't breathe.
Yes.
Walked the rest of the way, went home that night, flushed all my cigarettes.
Did you?
I flushed them all, didn't smoke after that, but went back to the park the next day, made it another like quarter mile.
Yeah.
Walked the rest of it. But I was like, well, I mean, that's 2 miles in a week. That's more than I've done in the past, 10 years. Yeah. And then like, over time just went back out there and slowly but surely, like maybe a month into that, I signed up for a marathon.
That's epic.
I would not recommend that to anybody. But yeah, like maybe 3 months into my running career, 4 months into my running career, I did my first marathon. I thought I was going to die. Like I thought I was dead. But yeah, I mean, that kick started it for me. And like,
yeah,
I have an addictive personality. It's beyond just alcohol. It's just sort of this need for dopamine that my brain has. So I had to find something that would give me that dopamine fix and allow me to get to like a homeostasis level without it destroying me in the process. And so like, yeah, running was sort of a substitute for me. And people always make that comment to me. They're like, well, you're a running addict. You're an exercise addict. I'm like, it's better than being a crack addict.
I'll happily take that.
Better than me to ask my wife. It's better than me being an alcoholic. So like, we'll take it.
Yeah.
But I think like that's not for everybody. Some people are just purely alcoholics or purely drug addicts. And once they get clean and sober, like that need for dopamine is solved. But for folks like me, that wasn't it. I needed some type of replacement in there to sort of get my fix, so to speak.
Well, and I think it's good to highlight that it's a both and also. Like you didn't stop your pursuit of your faith or your recovery.
That's correct.
It was an additional component therein. And that's what it's been for me too. It's like, I don't do that instead of, I do that in addition to.
Right.
And I think that all the components are stronger because they're pieced together.
That's correct.
In healthy, sober, mostly healthy.
That's correct. And that's a great point. And like, yeah, it's part of the quote armor that I try to put on each day to be well prepared for the fights to come. So it's a piece of the puzzle for me. But I think also like if it's just a trade, then it's still like idolatry. I'm trading one idol for another idol. And yeah, I don't think that's wise. So yeah, I think the right way to view that is with a lens on incorporation. Anything stick out to you with Fred?
Well, our last statement here, I'll read it again. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. How do you talk with folks about this? Why do we have to have a higher power? And we'll dive into the weeds with this as we get into the next few sessions.
Right. Well, so So here's how I diagram this out, especially as it pertains to the steps. Because step 3 is a big time step, and it's asking you to give over, to literally turn over my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him. And to do that, I have to know several things. And I have to know who God is. And I have to know that God is for me and God is not against me and that God is trustworthy and God does have my best interest in mind. I see it as an absolutely, and you can totally disagree with me, I've got strong opinions, an absolutely foolish thing to turn my will and my life over to the care of the tree.
Yeah, when we've talked about this.
That's just seems
this doorknob theology.
The stupidest
BS.
thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Like now so the tree, I've just turned my will and my life over to the care of the tree. That makes absolutely no sense to me.
You can't have it both ways. Either this is serious and we're really doing this, and in which case, to your point, and I agree, we need to know what we're turning it over to,
right.
Or it's just a whimsical thing. It's like, well, whatever, pick a doorknob, pick a tree.
Right. Yeah. The idea, I just have a hard time subscribing to the idea that your higher power can be the doorknob or it can be the tree.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to turn your will and your life over to the care of it. I see that step as having so much more gravitas attached to it than I think people give it credit for. Because to me, it's literally the moment you for a lot of us, it's the moment you sort of surrender over to Christ.
Yeah.
It's like the conversion experience. And like that to me is something that is like holy, and that is something that is sacred, and that is something that like should not be entered into lightly or whimsically, or the significance of the step shouldn't be diminished with just this sort of flippant, like, let's just get through the step. Just your higher power can be the door, and like that's fine. What were we doing in step 2? If the door is going to be my higher power, like what was step 2 about then? Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. So wait, so I came to believe that the door could restore me to sanity? Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Like it just doesn't make sense. And so I think, like, to your question, when I work with people, I sit on step 2 and sit on step 3 for a long time, because I want people to be able to know the God of the Bible and know the Jesus of the New Testament and know the power that the Holy Spirit has, so that they can enter into step 3 with the confidence and assurance that, like, no, God is for me. It's 100%. Like, God is for me and He is my defense, and I can trust Him to be my defense. So that's my long answer to that.
And I've come at this from a couple different angles over the years, and I used to be a little bit more liberal with it, especially, when I first sobered up, first went through these steps with my first sponsor. I wasn't going back into the Bible. Like I was really treating AA as my religion at that time for a couple of years initially. And I would dabble back in before I really started seeking the faith again. And one of the things I adopted early on was it wasn't the tree approach, but it was close to it, because we explained if somebody had some issue with step 3 specifically, this is just a decision to work the rest of the steps. Think of it in those terms. If you're held up, don't let God hold you up. What you just said is what I did. Let's make forward progress here and step into it and see if God is real, and we're going to position ourselves for Him to work in and through us, then He will begin to change us as we go through this. And I don't know if that's exactly the right approach today. It's not exactly how I approach it, although I still use that phrase pretty freely when trying to explain, especially the third step to people. Just a layman's term. I appreciate how steadfast you are on this point, though, because it's recently given me And if anybody can hear my son say, I pooped.
Yes, let's go. Is that what he's saying?
I'm going to have to
That's
go help
awesome.
him in the potty in just a second.
That's
Help him
awesome.
off. But I've appreciated your steadfastness with that, because I think that's really the stance. I mean, that's where our belief lies. That's where our hope is. And I'm going to go get it.
I think he really needs some help. I think he's stuck on the potty. Yeah, we all need a little help every now and then. No, I mean, I appreciate it. And I can understand like that, there's lots of ways to get sober, and there's lots of ways to become sober minded. But I think the Bible makes it clear there's only one way to heaven, and there's only one way into right relationship with the Lord. And I think that's just where my passion in that part of the step and that part of the exploration comes from, is because my hope for you, for people in recovery, is not just sober mindedness, but it's like eternity.
Yeah.
And
what's the ultimate point here?
Right. Yeah. And I get it. Like, sober-mindedness can lead to eternity. It's kind of like what you're saying. Like, let's just get you over the hurdle and get you engaged in the process. But I also, at the same time, you never know when people are going out, and you never know when people are going to die or OD or whatever it may be. And like, I don't know. I just feel like it's sort of, I don't know, duty is the right word. It's like my call as a believer to have that type of stance and to like encourage them towards that. I mean, just in my business, I've worked with too many guys that have gone out, and it's like, man, you want to give them that opportunity to get into that right relationship with the Lord, so that if something tragic does happen, like, praise the Lord, we'll be hugging in heaven.
Well said. At least there's the choice. Choice presented.
Right. All right, on that note, go wipe your son's bottom. All right, go help this poor guy out. He's freaking hurting in there.
Hayden, get in here. There he is.
Poop all over his hands. It's all over his.
He just wants to see what we're doing now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool, right, man.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time.
Indeed. I got some shoes to buy now.
Yeah, you do. I did. I turned you on to those.